All right, so you are very, very welcome this evening. And a huge welcome to our special guest this evening, Jamar J. Perry. We are so
Oh,
delighted to have you on behalf of the INTO LGBT group who have asked me to be the interviewer for this evening. We are so delighted to have you here. And I know that the INTO LGBT group is chuffed to see Cameron Battle coming out into the world and having more diverse representation in children's books for us to bring into classrooms. Um, I'm going to give a little introduction to your background, Jamar, and then hopefully you can introduce the book to us tonight. So Jamar J. Perry, folks, is a professor, an instructional coach, and a sensitivity reader, and now with Cameron Battle and the Hidden Kingdoms, just published in the UK and Ireland last week, a debut author. Jamar studied psychology in Kentucky before switching to English literature with a concentration in education. And after graduation, Jamar became a middle school teacher in the Washington, D.C. area. After 4 years of teaching and finishing his master's degree in educational leadership, Jamar enrolled into a PhD program at the University of Maryland and research focused on Black boys, the history of traditional and Black masculinity in America, and racial literacy. With this research focus, he started to write again, writing the stories for the types of reader he always wanted to engage. And I love this, Jamar. Reluctant readers, Black boys who needed to understand that they were magic and that they could also have joy, that they could be vulnerable and emotional and be the hero in their own stories.
absolutely.
Amazing. So, we are here tonight to talk about the importance of representation in literature. And I couldn't be more thrilled that I get to discuss this topic with you. In my own work over the last year, we've been working on this reading guide called Free to Be Me, which is free to download on the Children's Books Ireland website. And we've been looking for titles, firstly, that are excellent. They've got to be good. And titles for kids from 0 to 18 with all kinds of representation in. So, people of color, people who have a disability, people who are neurodivergent, people with different types of family, different sexualities. And I loved Cameron Battle so much because it wasn't just about who Cameron was, but there was a
Right.
lot about who he was and where he came from, as
Mhm.
well as saving the world on the side.
Right.
Would you tell us a little bit about the book and introduce it to folks who haven't yet read it?
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Elena, for that amazing introduction. I'm super, super, super excited to be here. And I was super excited to get to get the invite as well. So I am the author of this book, Cameron Battle and the Hidden Kingdoms. It is my debut novel. So this is the UK version, and this is the American version. So I have two covers, so that's great. I love both
Do
the
you have a
covers.
favorite?
I don't know. It depends on my mood, right? So I think sometimes I'm more in the mood of like I'm more in the mood of like being, open to understanding who I was as a child, and we'll talk about that as we talk about Cameron Battle and the Hidden Kingdom. So the American version speaks to me a lot more because it just has Cameron on the cover. But then when I'm interested in talking about, who Cameron is and why he is the way that he is, I love to talk about, his friends. His friends make up who he is as well too. So the UK cover is sometimes on my mind as well. So this week, the UK cover is on my mind. Um, so Cameron Battle in the Hidden Kingdoms is about a 12-year-old boy, Black boy. His name is Cameron Battle. And he has two best friends, Aaliyah and Zion. And so 2 years ago, his parents die in a car crash, and he goes to live with his grandmother. And while he's living with his grandmother, he reminisces and thinks about this magical book that his parents have read to him his entire life. They've told him that it's a magical book and that it has his ancestry inside of it. But of course, Cameron Battle doesn't really believe in the magic part of it, but he does believe in the book itself because it comes from his parents and it comes from the love that his parents shared with him. And so, because he loses his parents too early, he wants to see the book again. He wants to be able to read it. He wants to be able to be close to his parents. But his grandmother tells him that, the book just brings up too many memories and too many bad memories. So she takes the book away from him to protect him. But of course, he's a 12-year-old boy, right? So his two best friends, Aaliyah and Zion, they kind of push him to go to the attic where the book is, where his grandmother locked it away. And when they read from the book again, it just opens up a whole new world of fantastical creatures and magic and, powers. And, there's a queen who has all this power, but she's losing her power because her sister is trying to take the power away from her. So it just opens up a lot of conversations around who this Black boy is, who Cameron Battle is, where he comes from, and what happened to his parents. So yeah, that's Cameron Battle in the Hidden Kingdoms.
Amazing. What's it been like this well, you've had about a month of it being published in Australia and in the States. So have you got to get out there and interact with readers? I mean, it's obviously a topic that's so close to your heart. Has it been an emotional time being out there with this book?
Yeah, so it's been it's been emotional, I would say. It's been really, really great to get my debut novel out there. And I'm actually glad that this is my debut novel because so much of myself is in this book. And I've done a lot of interviews that talk about like why I wrote it and why Cameron is the way that he is in the book, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been very, very exciting, but also emotional at the same time. So when the book came out in America, COVID cases were just like through the roof. So we were supposed to do like a big, huge tour. I was supposed to do a lot of school visits and do a lot of bookstore visits and things like that. I still got to do them, but they were all just virtual. But it was still good to kind of see the readers and kind of see, at some of my events, there were like 9 or 10 schools that showed up. So it's just really good to just see and overwhelming to see the type of, attention the book has been getting. I'm really excited about that. So yeah, it's been good. I would say it's been really, really good, and it's also been just another way of kind of catharsis for me to kind of get through all those emotions, that I wrote in the novel based on who I was as a child as well too. So another bit of exciting, but also it's time to kind of get those emotions out and kind of move on to the sequel and things like that. So yeah, it's a lot of things. There's a lot of things happening. Yeah.
We will get to the sequel. I'm excited to hear about that. If you can tell us about it, we can have some little exclusive tidbits. How powerful did it feel for you to be able to give this life to Cameron? Is he kind of an alter ego to your younger self, to be able to kind of say, off you go in your chucks and go save the world and be the hero and come into your own power? That must have felt really empowering to do.
Oh, absolutely. So I wrote a couple books before this one, and they weren't, I had an agent and we went on submission to publishers and things like that. But they just didn't do anything on submission the way that I would like them to. And so I always used to get really upset because I always felt like I had a story to tell, and I always felt like I really wanted to really showcase Black boys in fantasy. That's been my jam for a long time. And even when I got my PhD, I focused on Black masculinity, right? Black boy masculinity, Black American masculinity. And so that's been my thing, for a long time. But then when I wrote this novel for children, this is when I really start to think about who was I as a child. And so when I used to be a teacher, when I taught my students how to write personal narratives and storytelling and things like that, I always told them to write what they know, right? So if you need something, like if you have a writer's block or you're trying to figure out what to write about, I always tell them to write what you know and to write what you've been through. And so Cameron Battle is really just an amalgamation of, who I was as a child and who I wanted to be as an adult. And so when I was a child, and I mentioned this in a lot of my interviews, is that I was very, very lonely. I was very, very depressed. I didn't know what depression was at that time, of course, but I always felt like this heaviness on my life growing up. And as I think about it now, there's always a heaviness as well too. I was very, very lonely. I didn't have friends growing up. I was very, very different. And I wasn't as masculine as other Black boys was, I guess, because I read a lot. Even I don't understand like why people think that boys reading is not masculine, but whatever. But yeah, so I read a lot, I wrote a lot. I was always to myself. I was always in the library reading. Every time we would go to lunch or every time we would go to recess, it was just me in the library reading because I felt like reading was my safe space. And so I was very, very lonely because I was struggling at school and I was also struggling at home as well. I was in a family of 8. We were very, very poor. We didn't have that much money growing up. I never had the latest things. I never had the latest shoes. I never had the latest clothes. I wore hand-me-downs all the time. My stepfather was a janitor, so we didn't really have that much money coming in, and so it was really hard for me growing up. And so I always thought about you know, what would it look like for a boy who was kind of like me growing up, and how would it look if he had those powers, right? So if you read Cameron Battle and the Hidden Kingdoms, we get to meet Cameron Battle at the beginning of the novel. He's lonely, you know, he's depressed because he misses his parents, and he only has two friends. He has Aaliyah and Zion, and that's it. And so I really just want to showcase like who I was as a child, and how a Black boy who is lonely, and a Black boy who is depressed, and a Black boy who misses his parents, what does it mean when he finds something that belongs to his parents and he gains power from that? So what does that actually mean? And what is the power of ancestry as well too? And so I think that there was just a lot of things in this novel that I really kind of struggled with as a child, and I really wanted to kind of put that in novel form. And I think I did that with Cameron Battle and the Hidden Kingdoms, and I'm excited for everyone to kind of see his journey.
You did. And I think on a lot of levels, some kids will pick it up and think that's a great read because
Mhm.
I'm okay. And you know, I just love a rollicking, brilliant fantasy
Right.
novel. And other kids will pick it up and find real comfort in the fact that by the end of the novel, Cameron has kind of come to terms with the fact that he's got found family. And that idea
Mhm.
of chosen family and your friends becoming your family is really clear in the novel. I mean, he has his grandma, of course, but
Mhm.
having Aaliyah and Zion, they're like alternative bits of him in a sense. They have strengths that he doesn't have. They seem to kind of reflect things back to him. And I
Mhm.
actually would love to talk to you for a moment about Aaliyah because I think she almost validates him in a sense.
Mhm. She
She's like
does.
his Jiminy Cricket, isn't she? She
Yeah.
she feels like the voice of reason to me.
Yeah, so thank you for that question, because I love that you talked about like how Aaliyah and Zion are just like different parts of Cameron, and they kind of help him along this journey to be a hero. And that's what I sought out to do. So remember how I said growing up, I didn't have any friends. And so I'm 31 now. And so I always tell my students when I was teaching that like when you say something to another child, or if if you isolate them, or you're not friends with them, or you treat them badly, one thing can kind of determine their whole trajectory in life. And so at 31 years old, like I still struggle with friendship because I didn't have friends growing up. So I still struggle with like making those deep bonds with people. I still struggle with making friends with people because I'm just not used to it. I'm used to being alone. I'm used to being like kind of a lone ranger. And so when I created Aaliyah and Zion, I didn't know how to create them. And so what I did was I just created them based on who I was as a child. And so Cameron Battle is that young, lonely, depressed person that I was as a child. And then once I got to high school and I realized that, you know, because I read a lot and because I wrote a lot, when you read and read and read and read, you become more intelligent. That's just that the research just supports that, right? And so I was very quick with the way that I spoke. Just like now, I'm very quick. I can talk really fast, and I can always just think of something on the fly. And Zion, I remember growing up in high school, I remember that a way for me to not be lonely was to make people laugh, in school. And so I would always just make people laugh because that was just a way to kind of get the loneliness away from me, and stop people from, treating me differently. And so Zion became that part of myself when I was, growing up, when I went to college. He's just the person that always makes Cameron laugh, and he brings some levity to the situation. Aaliyah is that part of myself who's very intelligent, who can see things that Cameron can't see. And so just like when you mentioned how Aaliyah validates Cameron, yeah, there are scenes in the novel where Cameron tries to hide the fact that he loves Zion, but she says that I totally understand that you love me, but you love Zion differently than you love me, and that's okay, right? And so those I really made these characters just who, just different parts, different versions of myself, because I just wasn't used to having those deep relationships with people. And so this novel was definitely an exercise into who I was as a child, and who I want to be. Like I want to be someone who can, develop those deep friendships with people. And so not only is it a character study for people who are reading it, but it's also I read it too to figure out like how does Cameron gain these friendships with people, and how does he really deepen those relationships? And so it's a study for me as well.
I love that you're learning from your own characters, but I feel
Yeah.
with a book in the world, you're going to find your tribe very quickly because you're
Mhm.
putting yourself out there and they'll come to you. I feel there's probably more than a handful of us who were lunchtime readers, sitting
Right.
in the bike shed or the corner of the yard, not playing with other folks.
Right.
So
That was me.
100%, I'm with you. I think that there's gorgeous relationships in this book, and I don't want to spoil too much of the novel for anybody, and I won't go into too many details, but I think it's okay to say that that Cameron is a queer Black boy, and that there is a relationship at the heart of this between Cameron and Zion, that is really important. And I think it's really subtly done. I wonder, was that a choice that you made? Is that about the pacing of the trilogy? Is it about the age group that you're speaking to, or did you just want to keep us in suspense?
It's about what you said. It's about the pacing of the trilogy and also about like the age group. So when it went on submission to publishers, it was the relationship between Cameron and Zion was very, very deep. It's deep now, but like when I first started working on it, there were more scenes in the novel that spoke to their queerness. Like there was a kissing scene, there was a lot of, you know, holding hands and cuddling and things like that, because I really, really wanted to show that, you know, Cameron Battle loves Zion Coleman and Zion Coleman loves Cameron Battle. And I really want to showcase that. But my editor was kind of like, you know, in middle grade, we really want to focus on the progression of their relationship, and to show like how they're not really struggling with how they love each other, but like understanding why they love each other, right? And so in the first book, we get to see excerpts of Cameron, you know, staring at Zion. They hold hands and they share the same bed with each other, and they have this very familiar relationship with each other. And they're brothers, but they also love each other as well. And so I really just wanted to be very, very subtle with the first book, and my editor really helped me understand that, you know, we want to make sure that their relationship feels earned to the reader, right? We want to make sure that their relationship, like when it comes time for them to actually finally showcase that they actually love each other, you know, will it make sense to the reader? And so at first I want to push back on that, because I'm just like, no, I want Black boys to fall in love with Black boys. I want that to be on the page. But then when I read it, it is on the page, as you know, like it's on the page. You get to see how much they love each other, right? We get to see that there's a different relationship that Cameron has with Zion than he does with Aaliyah. We get to see that on the page. But then in the second novel, of course, it's a totally different experience. Now that Aaliyah tells Cameron it's okay to be who you are. And his grandmother she knows about Zion and Cameron, and she's okay with Zion and Cameron being over each other's houses and spending the night and things like that. And so now that he knows that his grandmother accepts him and he knows that Aaliyah accepts him, then that's all that matters. So in the second book, it's not about exploring who he is with Zion. It's about, you know, I love you and you love me, so let's be together.
I love it. That's awesome. I'm so
Sure.
happy we're going to get to see more of that. And
Mhm.
because I like that, I'm turning the pages going, come on, kiss him.
Right.
This is just me. I'm excited for book two. That kind of relationship in the family with his grandma is obviously a little less traditional. His mom and daddy
Mhm.
are not around, as you explained, and I won't go into too much more of that either. But tell me maybe a bit more about your research on Black masculinity, on families and how they interact with each other, and how hard was it to I suppose not to put everything in there because when you
Mhm.
know so much both about Black masculinity and about the Igbo mythology that's featured in this book, it's got to be hard to hold back and put in just the right amount that the story can still keep ticking on.
Absolutely. It was tough. Like it like the history of masculinity is long and broad. And so I really, when I did my PhD, I was really focusing on Black masculinity, but I can't talk about Black American masculinity without talking about African masculinity and how that differs from Black American masculinity, right? And so when I was doing my research, it's so funny how like the research that I was doing 4 years ago, 5 years ago, it connects to this novel in a total. I wasn't even thinking about Cameron Battle back then, but when I was doing research for my PhD, I was finding that, you know, African masculinity was more communal based. It was more taking care of the family. It was more, egalitarian. It was more, you know, the man understood the woman's role and the woman understood the man's role. It was very communally based, and everyone fed each other, things like that. So that was African masculinity, and to a certain extent, it still is today. But then when Africans were forcibly removed from Africa and they were moved to America, we get to see a shift in what masculinity means in African cultures versus African, Black, American cultures in America, and in the Caribbean. Masculinity began to shift because religion became a part of America as well, and a part of the way slaves were kept on plantations, right? So slave masters used religion in order to keep Black Americans on slave plantations, to keep them away from, to keep them from not revolt, right? And so because of that, masculinity began to shift because there was no there were Black American families, but at any time your family could be torn apart. Your wife could be given to the master, or your kids could be taken away from you to be sold to another plantation, right? And so because of that, masculinity began to be shifted. Masculinity began to be all about violence. It began to be about, the conquering of women. It began to be about like the strongest man wins, because that's what Black men had to do in order to be able to survive slavery. And so I started thinking about the differences between how is this African masculinity come into play when it comes to a Black American boy like Cameron, who has grown up in this society that tells him that Black boys shouldn't cry, that tells him that Black boys shouldn't be queer, that tells him that Black boys shouldn't hug and show emotions to their best friends, right? And so we get to see how, just like when Aaliyah tells him, it's okay for you to love Zion, he's questioning because he's grown up in this whole world, this Black American world that tells him that being gay is not okay. But then when he goes to Shidani, we get Bakari, who tells him, it's okay to cry here, Cameron, right? So you see how the African masculinity is coming into concert with the Black American masculinity, right? And so there's a difference between African masculinity and Black American masculinity, and I wanted to kind of really show that within the novel. And I think that I did that a lot, but I had to like what you said, all these concepts that I'm talking about like Black boys can't cry and Black boys can't show emotions and Black boys have to be violent. I didn't put that in the novel. I put that in a way that's very implicit instead of explicit. And so to be honest, in order to not put all the information there, I had to, like, as you said in one of your questions, I had to plot, like I had to outline. And I had to really figure out, like, what are some things that I do know about this world and about Cameron and that I want to be in the novel, but what are some of the things that I know but I don't want to be in the novel? These are just background things for me to kind of flush through the second and third book if need be, right? And so I had to plot and get that information down to understand, I'm going to use this stuff, but I'm not going to use this stuff. And it also took a lot of sometimes I had to write everything I knew down in the chapters and then go back and just delete them later and add them to a document that I could keep for the second novel as well too, as a way to kind of think about, instead of me writing something down, instead of me trying not to write something, go ahead and write it and then just delete it and edit later.
Yeah, and make sure that you know it's in there. Yeah, I can feel a lot of that in what you've put in terms of that family-based structure, the feeding, the kind of eating together, the celebrating together, that's all in there. And then things like, I suppose what's built into Cameron is nearly that fear of failure, that thing of when he is learning. So when he goes to Shidani with his two friends, they're taught to fight in a particular fighting technique, and they're taught to enter Dambe. And he doesn't get that as quickly as his friends. So he's watching another Black boy and a girl who are there, fighting like warriors. And he's supposed to be the descendant. He's supposed to be the person who's there to save the world, and he can't do it. So there's got to be some thought process built in there without it being overt that that's what it's about.
Right. Yeah. That thing particularly, I really wanted to showcase that for so long, and that's another research aspect, right? For so long, Black boys are told that they have to be perfect, when it comes to sports, and perfect when it comes to physical aggression and things like that. But I wanted to show a totally different, I want to show that Cameron Battle is not, good 100% of the time, and he doesn't get this stuff immediately. We get to see a Black girl, Aaliyah, get it before Zion and Aaliyah do, and that was purposeful in the novel. I really want to do that, to show that sometimes that Black boys are so bogged down by masculinity because there's so many rules, and the rules don't make any sense, right? They don't make any sense when it comes to Black American masculinity. They make no sense. And so Cameron and Zion are so bogged down by all these rules of what it means to be masculine that Aaliyah takes over because she's just like, I'm not bogged down about that, right? And so she's
Yeah.
able to become a hero before Zion and Aaliyah, Zion and Cameron are, because they're so bogged down by all these messages that they have to succeed first. And Bakari tells him, like, it's okay, like you don't have to be perfect 100% of the time. Like you can take your time and get there. And so many times we see heroes who are in fantasy novels, when they're told that they are the hero, they accept it immediately. But Cameron doesn't do that. Cameron struggles with that.
Yeah, and I love Aaliyah in that she has a great sense of who she is, I feel, and really accepts everybody around her, and she's smart and doesn't mind calling them out sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there's a point where they're talking about a particular thing having been stolen, and they say, well, what kind of queen is she if she let that thing get stolen?
Right.
And she
Mm-hmm.
says, I'm sorry, are you victim blaming? So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
I like her sass. She's well able to stand up to the folks around her.
She is.
Um, I'd love to talk to you a bit more about the Igbo mythology that
Mm-hmm.
is so rich throughout this book and the culture, from the deities at the heart of the book to the clothing, the food, the djembe drums. I thought it was a
Mm-hmm.
really evocative world and a lovely contrast to the little bit of the real world that we do get to see. Why was that important to put into this book for you and for Cameron to really step into and start to understand?
Yeah. So yeah, it's my journey. I think that it showcases, how I grew up not knowing where I was from and not knowing where my ancestors were from, because so oftentimes, because Black Americans were forcibly, taken to America, they were enslaved by Europeans, um, white Europeans, I would say, because they were enslaved. After certain generations, they forgot where they were from, because like you have all these slaves on one plantation, they may speak different languages because they're from different tribes, they're from different countries and things like that. And so a lot of information was lost, and a lot of information was destroyed when they were brought to the Americas. And so in my family, I could only go back like 2 generations. That's it. Like I have my mother, she can tell me who my immediate family is, and I have my grandmother who can tell me who my extended family is, and that's it. I didn't really know. Always wanted to know. You know, I'm distinctly Black American, and I really want to know. But there's also an African side of me. My ancestors come from Africa, so what does that look like, and where do they come from? And so it wasn't until I went to college that I was able to kind of do the DNA test and all that stuff to figure out specifically which country in Africa I come from, but also which specific tribe, ethnic group in Africa I come from. I don't like to say tribe because I'm not from a tribe, from an ethnic group, Igbo, in Nigeria. And so from there, it was studying, okay, now that I know this part of myself, what is the Igbo? What is their mythology? What do they believe? And then from there, it was my PhD. Now let's talk about masculinity, right? And so it's so funny, again, so funny, like how all this trajectory leads me to writing Cameron Battle and the Hidden Kingdoms. I didn't know I was going to write this book 5, 6, 7 years ago when I was studying the stuff about myself. It was just an understanding of, I wanted to know where my family was from, and I wanted to know where my ancestors were from. And so ancestry is such a big part of this book. I wanted to show Cameron Battle as opposite of me, someone who is, in that regard, someone who knows where he's from. He knows where his ancestors are. He knows where, he knows, what makes this country tick. He knows the clothing, he knows the food, he knows the gods and deities and things like that. And so I really just wanted to showcase him as someone who, is not ignorant of where he's from, to show Black Americans that it's okay to find out where you're from, and there's power in that. And Cameron literally becomes that power, right? When he goes to this country, he literally finds out that he stands on the shoulders of all the ancestors that came before him. And now he's in flesh, he's now, their counterpart. So he becomes magic, literally.
Yeah, and meets his family and people who look like
Mm-hmm.
him. I mean,
Yeah,
literally look like him.
yeah.
Um,
Bakari
I,
looks just like him.
yeah, I can picture them in my head. We've been listening to a lot of authors over the last, number of years, and looking at research coming out of the States and of the UK,
Mhm.
less so in Ireland around representation, but just looking at the books that are on the market and how much representation there is. And it feels like it's growing slowly. I think people of color are better represented now in picture books than they used to
Mhm.
be, for sure.
Mhm.
And YA is kind of coming up. I love that this is a middle grade book because I do feel there's a little bit of a gap in middle grade, that there feels like there's slightly less representation. How do you feel things are in the States as a Black man who's trying to get published? Did you feel any
Mhm.
pressure to write a particular kind of story? Or did you feel free to write whatever you wanted?
I felt free to write what I wanted, but I also felt frustrated, during the process because there's a saying that we have in America that publishing hates Black men, like because there's no representation really. A lot of the times that Black male authors, and I'm in groups, I'm in like Twitter groups and Slack groups and things like that with a lot of Black male authors, and specifically Black queer male authors, and we don't get the opportunity to tell our own story so often that Black boys are put into books, but they're written by women or they're written by non-binary people, or there's a whole thing in America now where a lot of people are putting Black boys as love interests in rom-coms, but they're written by white women or they're written by white people, right? And so we are frustrated in the sense that when it comes to Black male representation and Black queer male representation specifically, we're not allowed to write those books. And so every time, that's why I got really frustrated because I felt like when I would go on submission to publishers, everybody would just reject me. But then I would see a book that comes out that shows Black love or that shows a Black love interest, and they would be in a relationship with a white person, and a white person would have written that story, right? And so for me, it was just frustrating to see that when it comes to Black fantasy, specifically when it comes to Black male fantasy, there's only two novels that have a Black boy main character that was written by a Black man. It's Tristan Strong by Kwame Mbalia, and now which was published 3 years ago, and then 3 years later it's now me with Cameron Battle and the Hidden Kingdoms, and that's it. When it comes to Black male fantasy written by Black men, that's it. Those are the two. Those are the two authors who write in that space, and that's literally it when it comes to traditional publishing. Now there are some people in Black who write Black male contemporary novels, but there's literally in America there's only like 3 or 4 of them. It's like Lamar Giles, Jason Reynolds, and Justin A. Reynolds. It's like 3. That's it. And so there's just a frustration on my part that so often times that Black boys are seen as, like, as we talked about Black masculinity, Black boys are just seen as, violent and sexually violent and, conquering women and being aggressive and being in prison, right? But then when you have people who, like me and like Kwame Mbalia, who wants to show a different side of that, because publishing is ran by white people and because it's ran by whiteness, which is different from white people, because you could be a Black person and still practice whiteness, right? Because it's ran by whiteness, and because you watch the media that show Black people, specifically Black boys, as being very, very violent, you don't want a book that celebrates something totally different from that. You want a book that's going to speak to people who watch the news, people who watch TV, people who watch movies, people who watch television shows. But I'm trying to break into the industry that, because I'm trying to break into an industry that, is perpetuated by whiteness, and it is all about showcasing and understanding Black boys as violent. It's really hard to break through that mold, right? It's really, really hard to break through that mold. And all the editors, mostly, I would say over 90% of American editors who are publishing these books are all white. And so they're, of course, they can say that they're anti-racist, right? But we all know that as a white person, it's very, very hard to get away from racism, because that's the American way. America was founded upon racism. America was founded upon white supremacy. We know that. And so because the majority of editors are white, it's really hard to break through when it comes to Black boys and Black boy fantasy and Black boy contemporary novels, because editors, they don't unconsciously, not consciously, I would say unconsciously, there's a bias against Black boys because they're inundated by media images that show Black boys different from the way that I write. And so it's been very, very frustrating. Like, I'm glad that I'm here, but it's also like, it's just 2 of us. And it's like, I really want
where's
more.
everybody else?
Yeah, where's everyone else?
It's really, okay, it's kind of overwhelming, the structural issues around that. What can we do to fix this? I mean, it's very easy to say people need to be listening to different kinds of voices and different kinds of stories, and
that's easy, right?
But it's
But
the structural problems of it that it's, how can we give people a hand up, and how can we make sure that there are more folks coming and following in your footsteps?
and that's when we get into the conversations like structural racism and institutional racism, right? Those things can be very under the surface sometimes, right? And in order to deal with that, you need people in place who are able to see that and respond to that in a way that's very equitable, right? Not equality, but equity, right? So equality means that everyone gets the same thing. Equity means that the people who are marginalized and minoritized get a hand up here, right? That's equity, right? And so we need people in place, and that can be white people, that can be Black people, that can be Latinx people. We need people in place who can recognize what institutional and structural racism is and work to break those barriers down. Because right now, we just don't really have that. And so I can count on my hand the number of Black editors that are in publishing. And I only know one Black male editor who's in publishing, and he's at Simon and Schuster. That is the only Black male editor. There was another one, Michael Strother. He was the second one that I knew, but he left publishing because he was just like, he tried to publish my book a long time ago and he couldn't. They told him no. And so he got frustrated by that and he left publishing. So there's only one Black male editor in the entire American publishing. It was just like, how is that okay? So not only do we need more Black editors, but we need more Black editors who are understanding what anti-racism is and understanding how to dismantle that. And we need more white people who have power to understand racism and work to dismantle that as well too. Because if you're a white person who has no power and you can't, and you are, if you're a white person who has no power, or if you're a white person who has power but don't understand structural and institutional racism, I don't need you, right? I need white people who are able to kind of understand those power structures and those power dynamics and understand the differences between white supremacy, whiteness, anti-racism, bias, and all that stuff. I need people like that who are able to kind of help us break through those molds of what it means to be, really anti-racist in America. And I think that my editor, Mary Kate Castellani is a white woman, but she's doing the work, and I have to give her, props for doing that work and understand where I come from, and understanding when I say I need this, or I need this type of cover. I don't want this type of cover. I need this, and I need this artist, and I need you to understand this about myself, and I need you to understand why I write the things that I write. And she understands that about me. And so, but that's one drop in a bucket, and we need more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so unusual that you would even get a say in the cover, because so many times with
So many
publishing
times you don't.
or you get a kind of a fait accompli with one bad alternative and they know you're going to pick this alternative. That's brilliant that you had a say in both covers.
Yeah, I did. I remember this cover I loved immediately when I saw it. So I was just like, oh, I like that, So this one was easy, but this one was very, 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 very hard, very hard. There were a number of options that were on the table, and I was like, I don't like none of this, right? I don't like none of it. It sucks. It's ugly. I don't like it, right? And so my editor was she didn't play. Like, she was just like, okay, you don't like it, then we'll change it. And then it took months and months and months to get the cover right. Cause I'm just like, I'm not gonna put a Black queer boy on the cover of a novel and it's not good. I want a Black queer boy on the cover of a novel that's fully realized. We get to see him. We get to understand that he's a dark-skinned Black boy. He's not a light-skinned Black boy. Cause there were so many covers that would come back that were light-skinned. I'm like, oh my God. It's just like whiteness permeates everything, right? And it permeates everything that we see. And it's just like, a Black boy, I could always tell when white people, give me covers, because you automatically make the Black boy light skinned. When they asked me for pictures of what Cameron Battle looked like, and all the pictures that I sent, he was dark skinned. So why is he light skinned on the cover? So just having those conversations were really, really valid for me, and having those conversations with my editor where she was like, okay, we'll change it, was validating for me, that she gave me, the free license to kind of pick what I wanted and do what I wanted to do for the cover. So,
and it's very clear in the book that there are, there are shades and folks throughout the book, including his friends, they're described really precisely.
Right. And I did that on purpose because I really want to showcase that, I really want to showcase Black boys and also show like the different tones in Blackness. Right. And so I think I did that. Yeah.
I've been watching a lot of your interviews as the books come out, and obviously we've had a month of watching the ones in the States to
Mhm.
get a sneak preview before it landed in the UK and Ireland. But I heard you say to somebody around kind of the topic of representation that at some point when you were younger, because of the lack of representation of Black characters in culture, the overwhelming whiteness of main characters was so pervasive that it got normalized for you, and it didn't
Mhm.
occur to you that there could be Black characters.
Yeah, it didn't occur to me. Like I thought it was just, oh, that's so funny. I love that podcast I did a couple weeks ago. I remember saying that exactly. Is that like I grew up, in a time where there weren't many Black characters at all. Like especially for children's novels, there's just none, like literally zero. And so um, I didn't think it was nothing. I didn't think anything was wrong with it. I thought that's just how the world was. Like I just accepted it. I don't remember consciously thinking, I want to see a Black boy as a main character. I want to see him as the hero. I never thought that because I always thought that, oh, that's just, publishing's white, move on, right? But it wasn't until I went to college that I really started to understand. I started taking more classes on African history and African American history, and start taking classes on the Harlem Renaissance and understanding who these authors were, because we did have a time where these Black authors were doing the thing. They had their books out there, they had their plays out there, they had their poetry out there. But then sometime after the Civil Rights Movement, it just kind of went away. Kind of went away with the advent of schooling and things like that. When they wanted to institutionalize schooling and they wanted to desegregate schooling as well too. Once the desegregation movement happened, and Black and white people were, put together in the same schools, we had a lot of conservative activists who wanted to control what students could read and what they could have access to. And so all that Black stuff just went away. And so I grew up in a time where conservatism was a big thing. It's kind of coming back now, which is very, very scary. But conservatism was a thing where they just controlled everything, what you ate, what you read, all that stuff. They controlled the libraries. And so there were no Black books. And so I got normalized in my head that it was okay to not have Black characters. But it wasn't until I went to college when I realized that, oh my God, there's a whole wealth and breadth of writers out there who are writing the Black experience, but they're not getting to the kids because publishing is not allowing it because of the conservative activism that's going on in America. So yeah, for sure. It was very, very, whiteness was very pervasive, very pervasive.
And I mean, the irony of me sitting here asking you questions about Blackness is not lost on me, Jamar. Are there days
Mhm.
that you would prefer to just not have to have these conversations?
Oh
I
my
mean,
God. Oh my God.
it's a
Yes.
burden. Can we just do some interviews where we ask you about the Griffins and move on?
Yeah, like when actually in that podcast interview that you saw or that you heard, I was very just like I really don't want to talk about this. Like I'm really to the point where I'm a little tired of talking about diversity. Like it's when you talk about diversity, it's almost like you're defending why you have to be here. And
Yeah.
it's like I shouldn't have to defend why I have to be here. To be honest, white people should be doing that because you forcibly brought us here, right? So you should be doing that. You should be doing the work. I shouldn't be here to teach you anything, right? You should be doing that work to understand me, not the other way around. And so often, Black communities are always taught that we have to understand the majority in order to get where they are. But they never have to come back and understand where we come from. So yeah, it gets frustrating a little bit.
So let's talk about the writing,
Yeah.
because you said you're a plotter. And I like to know about the processes and what your day to day is like in the writing.
Mhm.
So when you sit down to write, are you at home? Are you surrounded by post-it notes? Do you have
Mhm.
big world building documents with all of your different deities and their relations to each
Mhm.
other? And because I do that when I'm reading fantasy and I want
Mhm.
to map it out, I've got my list of who's who and who they're
Mhm.
related to, just to read the book and to look into things afterwards, things like the Umo that I wouldn't have heard of before, the spirits whose souls hadn't passed over to the
Mhm.
afterlife, and to understand where those are coming from. I would love to know what your plotting
Mhm.
process is like.
Oh, it's all on the computer. Like post-it notes, I have anxiety, so I have to have like really structured, notes that I take. Post-it notes would just be on my wall and I would never look at them. So for me, I open up different documents and I just have my world building notes. Who are the gods? Who are the goddesses? What do they do? Where they came from? Who created the gods? What do they control? We know Allah is the Queen Mother. We know the godmother. We know Agbala is the one who's healing injustice. We know Agwu is the trickster god, right? So I have a whole, but of course, in the novel, I just say Agwu's the trickster god. But in my notes, of course, there's a whole list of things that he can do. What is his powers? How does he present himself? Like in the novel, he presents himself as a baby, right?
Yeah.
But in my documents, he presents himself as everything. He's a tree, he's a bird, he's this, he's that. So I really outline everything. So I start with the world building first, like the world itself. Like who created the world, where these gods and goddesses came from, where did they create, what do these gods and goddesses control, like do they control healing and justice, trickery, the sun, thunder, lightning, what do they control? And then in another document, I create the characters, how they interact with the gods, who are they, what makes them tick, what's their relationships to other characters. And then in another document, I create what are the building blocks of this world, meaning the food, the clothing, the buildings, the libraries, the policia, the griffins, who controls the griffins, stuff like that. So I just go back and forth and like really understand, this world that I've created. And then I start writing my work through that. Of course, everything in those documents never get used, right? But it's good to have when when I'm 70, I can publish that stuff, right?
Absolutely, you can sell it on eBay for $1 million.
Right.
Were you teaching while you wrote this? I know you taught middle school for a while, but I don't know the timeline of that.
I taught middle school 5 years ago, but yeah, I was writing then. Yeah, it was a crazy time, right? Working from 9 to 5 and then coming home, grade papers, and then try to get an hour or two to write. So I'm a writer. I love one thing I do that writing never feels like work to me. So every single day I will always write at least 2,000 words every single day because it's important for me to get my words out and important for me to get my books done. Now, of course, a first draft of mine may take a month to write, but it may take 2 years to revise, right? That's just how the process goes. But yeah, when I was working as a teacher, it was tough. Like it was hell on wheels trying to figure out like how am I gonna teach, grade these papers, respond to students, call parents, and then find time to write at the end of my day. And so I was glad to get my PhD because in my PhD program, I may have had one class a night. It was like 3 hours. And then the rest of that time I was writing, even though the PhD was hard and was demanding. That's another thing I had to do, like write a dissertation and write at the same time. That was hard too. But it freed up a lot of time for me to kind of like really understand who my characters were, understand the world that I was building and things like that. But yeah, it was tough being a teacher and writing at the same time.
It's graft, yeah. And I'm sure there are a lot of teachers who are watching tonight who are kind of trying to find that time. So what an inspiration to see that you've done it and you managed it and that it's possible. And as a teacher, there are obviously always going to be creative children in your class and probably kids that you see a bit of yourself in as well. How did you get an opportunity to nurture some of those young writers? Did you see folks who had an interest and get to kind of pull them up a little bit as well?
So frustrating because I taught at a school that was 99% Black and the majority of my students were Black boys. And so I stayed at that school for 4 years and they will always put like what they call the problem children in my class because I was always there. At the end of the school year, all the teachers would quit and they would just hire a new staff and it would just be me left. And so they would always put the problem children, what they call, in my class because they kind of felt like, well, Mr. Perry has been here. I was Mr. Perry then. Mr. Perry has been here for so long, like we'll just put all the bad kid in his class and just let. And it would always be boys, it would never be girls. I had a class of 32 Black boys in my class because they just said that Mr. Perry can control them. And so it was hard. It was hard because like they've been giving messages for so long that, that they don't matter. And that reading sucks, and that reading is gay, right? And so only thing my kids cared about when they first came to me was like playing sports and playing video games and stuff like that. They wanted to do that. But like once I really showed them the love of reading and like how you can get lost in the world. And so I would just totally eschew, Shakespeare. I was just like, nope, we're not reading it, not doing it, not reading this white stuff, not doing it. And I would bring fantasy and sci-fi novels into the classroom and we would do novel studies on them. And so once I showed them the love of reading and how you can get lost in a novel, then I can bring back Shakespeare, right? I got to catch your interest first, right? And so unfortunately, I didn't have anyone that was interested in writing because I had to get them into reading first, right? You can't be a good writer unless you read, and then read some more. And then once you're done reading some more, read some more, right? And so I had to get them into reading and loving what reading and loving what reading would do for them before I could get into any type of writing. So yeah, it was just a struggle to get them to love reading first. And
You
so
have to meet them where they are,
to meet them where
absolutely.
they are. Mhm.
I would love to hear you read a little bit from the book if you wouldn't mind. And then I know
Absolutely.
we have somebody with a hand up for a question after that.
Sure. So I'm gonna read from chapter 2 in the novel. So this part is when Aaliyah and Zion are convincing Cameron that he can go to the attic and read from the magical book. Um, the attic is locked, I said. I don't want to get in trouble if Grandma catches us up there. Zion shifted the cover so that the only thing showing was his glasses. Trust me, Cam has a good reason for not wanting to go upstairs, he said, his words muffled. Shut up, Zion, I warned. What are y'all talking about? Aaliyah said. Nothing, Aaliyah, I said. He's lying, Zion said in a sing-song voice. There's an old book up there. His parents read it to him when he was a kid. They said it came from their ancestors. It's super creepy and awesome. He threw off the covers and puffed out his chest. We used to read it all the time. It's locked and we don't have a key, I repeated, urging her to change her mind. There's no way the power has not gone out for 2 years, so the circuit breaker can't be up there. You're trying to change the subject, Aaliyah said, her eyes sparkling with interest. I want to see this book. No, it's not. It's in the attic, Zion finished. Grandma has forbidden us from going up there. Zion, it's locked. Aaliyah made her way to my bedroom door again, turning the knob and peering out into the hallway. It settled. We're going upstairs, and I might be able to pick the lock. Please, Aaliyah, no, I said. I couldn't help, though, the curiosity that gripped me now. She walked over, concern in her eyes. I understand, Cam, I do. You've been through so much. Even though your mother's things belong to you now, if you don't want to go, we won't go. She was correct. I had a right to see and read the book my mama had left me. The book was mine now that she was gone, but Grandma had been trying to keep it from me. Still, there was no way we could get into the attic without a key, and Grandma always had it with her, and I was not going to let Aaliyah pick the lock. You're right, I said, but first we need. I stopped talking as soon as I went to the bedroom door, Aaliyah following close behind. Shining in blue light on the hallway floor was a key to the attic, its head encased in pink tape. It doesn't make any sense, I said, picking it up from the floor. The blue light disappeared as I grasped it, making me think it was just a trick of the light, or lack of light, actually. It's the attic key. By this time, Zion had joined us, putting my thoughts to words. Cam, how did the key get there? No clue, I whispered. Maybe Grandma dropped it on her way to her room? Aaliyah snatched it from me. We'll use the flashlight on my phone to see. Let's go. As we crept up the stairs to the attic, I couldn't shake the feeling that shivered up my skin. Why would the key be in the hallway? But now we tiptoed up the stairs to the 3rd floor, defying my grandma's orders. When we got to the attic door, I put the key in and opened it. And that is the end of chapter 2. So I would
Well
love to take any
done.
questions that people may have.
What a treat. I love hearing the writer read their own work. So thank you very much for that. I know we have a question from Annie who has a hand up. Annie, do you want to unmute?
Hi, Annie.
Hi there. How are you, Jamar? Thanks so much. I really enjoyed that, and thanks so much for the reading. Yeah, I'm sure probably some people might maybe know who I am. I'm actually an Iranian teacher, and I trained at Temple University. You might know Philadelphia.
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah. So I work with a lot of kids from all over the world, and we actually have a lot of Nigerian kids in Ireland. You might not know that. So you're welcome to come over anytime. And I'm sure you'll get lots of Igbo families welcoming you in. And
that'll be amazing.
Yeah. So, but my question is specifically about, in terms of your own, I guess, kind of cultural identity and kind of ethnic identity and that kind of development through your reading and through your writing, but also culturally within, I know you refer to them as, Black boys and yourself as a Black boy. But can you talk to us a little bit about the process through which you went and kind of the ages and stages and kind of the influences in terms of working or attending schools with white teachers, and what kinds of things might have contributed to you developing a good and strong identity as a proud Black man or a queer man, or however you identify. I think that's how you identify. Yeah, that would be, if you could.
Yeah, so growing up, I struggled with my queerness because, like, as we talked about earlier, there was just this thing where in my family, Black masculinity was like, well, I wouldn't say Black masculinity was upheld. I would say Black traditional hyper masculinity was upheld, right? When you, in my parents' house, you had to play a sport. You had to, you know, either play, you had to pick football, basketball, whatever, but you had to pick something, right? And so my thing was football, even though I hated it. Just because I was good at something doesn't mean I wanted to do it, right? So I picked football. My dad really stressed hard work. So he was a janitor. So like every Saturday we would get up, we would mow the lawn, we would go to his job, we would clean up all the time, things like that. So like they really value hyper masculinity, and they really value what it meant to just, you know, have a girlfriend and party a lot and play sports and be aggressive and, you know, fight all the time, right? And so that's how my household was. It was horrible. And then on Sundays she went to church, right? And so going to church I was just getting all these different messages that didn't really make any sense, right? So my household valued, you know, aggression, but then when you go to church, they value the opposite of that, right? And they tell you that you have to be meek, and they tell you that you have to be mild. And so I struggled with my queerness to the point where I grew up, I didn't have any teachers that I loved. I didn't have any teachers who fostered the love of reading. I did it myself because that's who I was from a young age. I didn't have any teachers. I can't remember any teachers that really like, I remember getting in trouble a lot because I read a lot, but there were no teachers who really fostered my love of reading until I went to college. And it wasn't until I had Black professors and Black teachers that really showcased that it's okay to be a reader, and it's okay to learn about where you're from. It's okay to learn about your ancestry. But because I grew up in the South, and because the majority of my teachers were white, and they were white female, and a lot of them were Republicans, conservative people in America, they didn't, you know, they didn't really value, they didn't really value, they valued reading, but it was, they valued white reading. And then they valued, you know, they showed us a lot of political propaganda. They showed us a lot of things about conservatism and about republicanism and about individualism and things like that. So, you know, when I look back on my life, you know, growing up, of course, I didn't really understand, you know, what my teachers were doing because I was so young. But it wasn't until now, as a 31-year-old person, that I realized that, you know, conservatism in the South in America is so big. It's just like, it's really hard to find teachers who really understand who you are as a Black student. It's so funny because like conservatism is huge in the American South, but the majority of the children who are being educated in the American South are Black kids. So it's just interesting like how, you know, conservatism comes from white people, but Black people are more democratic and more egalitarian. But I didn't really have teachers who really fostered the need for me to understand and love myself until I went to college. So I hope I answered that question.
You did. Thanks very much. Thanks for letting me ask a question.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jamar. I think you've been so frank and generous, and you've given us heaps to think about this evening. And if anybody has not yet read Cameron Battle and the Hidden Kingdoms, I would highly recommend you do so. One of you is going to get the chance to get a copy right now. So I'm going to share my screen briefly because we have got a wheel. We're going to spin the wheel to get the book winner.
And I'm so sorry I didn't get to everyone's question. I can stay a couple more minutes if anyone needs me to. But
I don't know if there are more questions in the chat. We'll have a quick check-in with everyone now. Roisin M is the winner. Woohoo! Woo! Good job, Roisin. So Cecilia, I think we'll have the details to pass on that book. Lucky Roisin, you have a treat ahead of you. If anyone has any more questions, pop them in the chat now or pop up your hand. And otherwise, I'll just give a really big thanks to to all of you for coming, to the INTO LGBT plus group for organizing this brilliant event, and particularly to Jamar for joining us this afternoon for you, and for sharing this evening with us. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.
And hopefully one day we can do it in person.
Yes, hopefully one day. Please email me if you need anything. If you have any questions that I didn't get to ask, email me. I'm going to put my email in the chat. Please email me and I'll email everyone back. And I can't wait for you all to read the novel. And that's it.
Amazing. And folks can find you on Instagram and Twitter so that they can keep up with other events, other interviews that are going on.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you, folks. Good night.